From your local election headquarters, this is Inside California Politics.
Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words. And it's about time.
President Biden beginning his first joint address to Congress by thanking the two California women at his side, standing behind him, Vice President Kamala Harris, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Inside California Politics. I'm Catherine Heenan. We're going to carry the Republican response to the president's speech. When that comes up, we'll bring it to you. But first, I want our analysts to pop up. We're going to talk to them about what they think about the president's speech. Sonoma State Political Science Chair David McEwen. Hello, David. And Bay Area Vice Chair of the California GOP, Jonathan Madison, also a partner at Madison firm, at the Madison Law Firm, and former senior advisor to Nancy Pelosi, Michael Yockey. Okay, gentlemen, the president eating into our time, so let's get right to this. It was an unusual address in many ways. What did the president hope to accomplish, and did this work for him? David, I'm going to start with you.
Look, this is an incredible speech. It's expansive, it's activist, it's about, in some ways, an old Democratic Party in terms of expanding lots of different ideas. At the same time, trying to push forward the narrative about how many issues are related to social justice, like high-speed internet access, like access to clean water, and joining those things. The real, I think, kind of juxtaposition is in the wake of the guilty verdict against Derek Chauvin and race and the difficulty over race discussions in this country, combined with the optics of who is standing behind sitting behind the president, Nancy Pelosi and the vice president, that whole narrative of change is going to challenge this administration moving forward because things are so tight in Congress itself. But nonetheless, it is an ambitious, incredible agenda. And certainly Joe Biden carried that out tonight in terms of throwing everything out there for Congress to consider over the next, say, 100, 200, 300 days.
Yeah, I know, David, we were talking about the fact he touched on everything from union jobs to ending cancer. But Jonathan, let me go to you. What did you think of the speech?
Well, let me just say at the outset that I'm glad he finally did address Congress. It's typically a much later response than most presidents in recent history have given. Even President Trump, I think, gave his first address at, I think, late February. And we all know that, President Biden gave about, 40 executive orders in his first 8 days of office. But I'm glad that he finally did make a response to Congress here. I like what I heard in substance, but I'll be honest with you, Catherine. I was a little concerned about the fact that what he had hoped to achieve in bipartisanship, I think, may be overshadowed by some different elements of his party. The Working Families Party is actually giving their own response tonight with Representative Jamal Bowman of New York. And so I think that shows a little rift there in the party, given that President Biden should represent the Democratic Party, and yet the Democratic Party is also giving another response. That being said, I did like what he had to say in substance. Don't know if he achieved all the bipartisan support part. Have some other things to say with regard to free tuition, which sounds amazing, but I'll let Michael Yockey get some time in here.
All right, well, let me ask you real fast, just because you brought it up, Jonathan. Republicans have accused Biden of a bait and switch. I mean, he did campaign on the notion that he could and would work with Republicans. They're saying that's not happening. Did you hear anything tonight that changes that perception?
Well, I heard a number of things tonight where he did reference and say, I'm willing to work with all sides, anybody who has an opinion, which is what you hear every president say, to be honest, So I don't know that I heard anything tonight that would change that perception. Sounds great in substance, but like all presidents, you just have to wait and see.
All right, Michael Yockey, your turn. What did you think of the speech?
What's interesting, this is a president who many people characterize, and in fact, he even said that he was a transitional figure. But I don't think that they figured out that the transition was back to the New Deal. That this is a president who has decided that the era of small government is one that has created limited opportunities, that has curbed our ability to compete in the world. And he's decided, I'm going big. And this is what the speech was about. It was about going big. And what's interesting is that he is a Democratic president, but he was talking to the American people, as he should. But he was talking to the American people in a way that I think people underestimate. He has 60% support. He has the majority of independents in this country supporting what he's doing. And when he says bipartisan, he means bipartisan with a little b, as in the American people. But he made it very clear. He wants to reach out. He wants to work with people across the aisle. But he also understands that we need to get things done. And that's what this speech was about. It was about, let's get these things done. And I think these ideas will resonate with the American people. Heck, they even resonated with Jonathan tonight, so that's a good thing.
All right, but he would be moving the goalposts, gentlemen. I mean, his proposals represent what would be a major, probably permanent change in the role of federal government. And there are programs, including the child care, most other family-related programs, generally dealt with at the local level. So some are even suggesting that this is approaching the same league as Social Security and Medicare. David.
Yeah, Catherine, I think that most of what he's putting forward, I mean, they're very close readers of the polls here. Most of these major initiatives have at least 60% support by most Americans. And so that is base plus. That's Democrats plus a large measure of independents to get there. That means they're going to negotiate hard with Republicans, but they're willing to set the bar way up here and then make Republicans kind of come up to where they're at in a higher place. If you put together the $5 trillion that have already been passed by this Congress or previous Congress to address COVID, and the $4 to $5 trillion that the Biden administration is proposing overall, that is an incredibly high number of the national deficit. However, it's also the New Deal, the Great Society, rolled into the 21st century and would make Joe Biden a fantastically incredible achiever of a president. It would put him in the league with people like FDR if they were able to accomplish this. The problem is going to be getting any Republican votes, as Jonathan and Michael know.
All right, Jonathan, on that note, getting any Republican votes, what do you think?
It's going to be tough here. I have to tell you, even though what he said tonight sounded great in substance to probably most people, I think the methods and the ways and the means to which he gets there is going to be problematic for a lot of viewpoints, particularly conservatives. I'll give you two brief examples. His increase in corporate taxes goes from 21% to 28%. Sounds, okay for people that think about Amazon and Apple and a lot of big corporate entities. But what about the small businesses? What about the small mom and pop shops that are characterized as corporations with their businesses? That's going to be a big tax burden on those families. I also think about the free tuition. Sounds great, particularly with regard to community colleges. However, we don't want to incentivize state schools to increase tuition. And at this point, most of the legislation coming from Democrats, particularly that of Bernie Sanders, is structured in such a way that it's going to give a bailout to state schools that increase their tuition, and it's going to penalize schools that give more affordable tuition. And I don't think we should be incentivizing anyone to do that, and particularly not incentivizing American families and their tax dollars to incentivize such logic. So with that, those are just some of the concerns, but it mirrors a lot more of what he had to say. So.
All right, Michael, what do you think?
This is a country that has lagged behind where there's discontent because people believe that we can't get things done, that it's just business as usual, that any change that happens is incremental. Well, this agenda is anything but incremental. It's about wiping out childhood poverty. It's about making education universal. It's about increasing healthcare, and it's about making investments in crumbling roads and infrastructure that we all know and can see every time that we go out to an airport, on a drive, anywhere, or across a bridge in this country. We understand that, but we haven't done anything about it. And he's saying, let's do something about it finally. What's interesting to me is that a lot of people talk about, well, why aren't more Republicans crossing over? And the fact is that if you want to make more Republicans cross over, you pass H.R. 1. You expand voting. You create a broader democracy. Because right now, the Republican Party, with all due respect to Jonathan, is being held captive by a base that does not reflect the majority of America. And when that base can expand, because I believe in a strong two-party system, with H.R. 1, with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, you will be able to see more ability to be bipartisan, the ability to work together as we've had in this country in the past and can do in the future. And I think those are the things that are going to be important. And I think that the challenge for Biden and for this Congress is to figure out how are we going to do all these things with a bare majority. Are we going to use reconciliation? Are we going to create some kind of a limited exception to the filibuster? Because these are things that need to be done, and Biden recognizes that they need to be done.
All right, we've been talking about the fact the Republican response is coming up. The job of responding has fallen to the U.S. Senate. Oh, it is happening now? All right, U.S. Senate's only black Republican, Tim Scott of South Carolina, and I'm just being told that response has started.
For all Americans, no matter how we voted. This was the pitch. You just heard it again. But our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. We need policies and progress that brings us closer together. But 3 months in, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further apart. I won't waste your time with finger pointing or partisan bickering. You can get that on TV anytime you want. I want to have an honest conversation about common sense and common ground, about this feeling that our nation is sliding off its shared foundation and how we move forward together. Growing up, I never dreamed I would be standing here tonight. When I was a kid, my parents divorced. My mother, my brother, and I moved in with my grandparents. 3 of us sharing one bedroom. I was disillusioned and angry, and I nearly failed out of school. But I was blessed. First, with a praying mama. And let me say this, to the single mothers out there who are working their tails off, working hard, trying to make the ends meet, wondering if it's worth it, you can bet it is. God bless your amazing effort on the part of your kids. I was also blessed by a Chick-fil-A operator, John Moniz, and finally with a string of opportunities that are only possible here in America. This past year, I've watched COVID attack every rung of the ladder that helped me up. So many families have lost parents and grandparents too early. So many small businesses have gone under. Becoming a Christian transformed my life, but for months, too many churches were shut down. Most of all, I'm saddened that millions of kids have lost a year of learning when they could not afford to lose a single day. Locking vulnerable kids out of the classroom is locking adults out of their future. Our public schools should have reopened months ago. Other countries did. Private and religious schools did. Science has shown for months that schools are safe. But too often, powerful grown-ups set science aside, and kids like me were left behind. The clearest case I've seen for school choice in our lifetimes, because we know that education is the closest thing to magic in America. Last year, under Republican leadership, we passed 5 bipartisan COVID packages. Congress supported our schools, our hospitals, saved our economy, and funded Operation Warp Speed, delivering vaccines in record time. All 5 bills got 90 votes in the Senate. Common sense found common ground. In February, Republicans told President Biden we wanted to keep working together to finish this fight. But Democrats wanted to go it alone. They spent almost $2 trillion on a partisan bill that the White House bragged was the most liberal bill in American history. Only 1% went to vaccinations, no requirement to reopen schools promptly. COVID brought Congress together 5 times. This administration push us apart. Another issue that should unite us is infrastructure. Republicans support everything you think of when you think of infrastructure. Roads, bridges, ports, airports, waterways, high-speed broadband. We're in for all of that. But again, Democrats want a partisan wish list. They won't even build bridges to build bridges. Less than 6% of the president's plan goes to roads and bridges. It's a liberal wish list of big government waste, plus the biggest job-killing tax hikes in a generation. Experts say when all is said and done, it would lower wages of the average American worker and shrink our economy. Tonight, we also heard about a so-called family plan, even more taxing, even more spending, to put Washington even more in the middle of your life, from the cradle to college. The beauty of the American dream is that families get to define it for themselves. We should be expanding opportunities and options for all families, not throwing money at certain issues because Democrats think they know best. Infrastructure spending that shrinks our economy is not common sense. Weakening our southern borders and creating a crisis is not compassionate. The president is also abandoning principles he's held for decades. Now he says your tax dollars should fund abortions. He's laying groundwork to pack the Supreme Court. This is not common ground. Nowhere do we need common ground more desperately than in our discussions of race. I have experienced the pain of discrimination. I know what it feels like to be pulled over for no reason, to be followed around the store while I'm shopping. I remember every morning at the kitchen table, my grandfather would open the newspaper and read it, I thought. But later I realized he had never learned to read it. He just wanted to set the right example. I've also experienced a different kind of intolerance. I get called Uncle Tom and the N-word by progressives, by liberals. Just last week, a national newspaper suggested my family's poverty was actually privilege because a relative owned land generations before my time. Believe me, I know firsthand our healing is not finished. In 2015, after the shooting of Walter Scott, I wrote a bill to fund body cameras. Last year, after the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I built an even bigger police reform proposal. But my Democratic colleagues blocked it. I extended an olive branch. I offered amendments, but Democrats used a filibuster to block the debate from even happening. My friends across the aisle seemed to want the issue more than they wanted a solution. But I'm still working. I'm hopeful that this will be different. When America comes together, we've made tremendous progress, but powerful forces want to pull us apart. 100 years ago, kids in classrooms were taught the color of their skin was their most important characteristic. And if they looked a certain way, they were inferior. Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. From colleges to corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all, by doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country. It's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination, and it's wrong to try to use our painful past to dishonestly shut down debates in the present. I'm an African American who has voted in the South my entire life. I take voting rights personally. Republicans support making it easier to vote and harder to cheat, and so do the voters. Big majorities of Americans support early voting, and big majorities support voter ID, including African Americans and Hispanics. Common sense makes common ground. But today, this conversation has collapsed. The state of Georgia passed a law that expands early voting, preserves no excuse mail-in voting, and despite what the president claimed, did not reduce election day hours. If you actually read this law, it's mainstream. It will be easier to vote early in Georgia than in Democrat-run New York. But the left doesn't want you to know that. They want people virtue signaling by yelling about a law they haven't even read. Fact checkers have called out the White House for misstatements. The president absurdly claims that this is worse than Jim Crow. What is going on here? I'll tell you, a Washington power grab. This misplaced outrage is supposed to justify Democrats' new sweeping bill that would take over elections for all 50 states. It would send public funds to political campaigns you disagree with and make the bipartisan Federal Elections Commission partisan. This is not about civil rights or our racial past. It's about rigging elections in the future. And no, the same filibuster that President Obama and President Biden praised when they were senators, the same filibuster that the Democrats used to kill my police reform bill last year, has not suddenly become a racist relic just because the shoe is now on the other foot. Race is not a political weapon to settle every issue the way one side wants. It's far too important. This should be a joyful springtime for our nation. This administration inherited a tide that had already turned. The coronavirus is on the run. Thanks to Operation Warp Speed and the Trump administration, our country is flooded with safe and effective vaccines. Thanks to our bipartisan work last year, job openings are rebounding. So why do we feel so divided? Anxious. A nation with so much cause for hope should not feel so heavy-laden. A president who promised to bring us together should not be pushing agendas that tear us apart. The American family deserves better, and we know what better looks like. Just before COVID, we had the most inclusive economy in my lifetime, the lowest unemployment rates ever recorded for African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians, and a 70-year low nearly for women. Wages were growing faster at the bottom than at the top. The bottom 25% saw their wages go up faster than the top 25%. That happened because Republicans focused on expanding opportunity for all Americans. In addition to that, we passed opportunity zones, criminal justice reform, and permanent funding for historically Black colleges and universities for the first time ever. We fought the drug epidemic, rebuilt our military, and cut taxes for working families and single moms like the one that raised me. Our best future will not come from Washington schemes or socialist dreams. It will come from you, the American people. Black, Hispanic, white, and Asian, Republican and Democrat, brave police officers in Black neighborhoods. We are not adversaries. We are family. We are all in this together, and we get to live in the greatest country on earth. The country where my grandfather in his 94 years saw his family go from cotton to Congress in one lifetime. So I am more than hopeful. I am confident that our finest hour is yet to come. Original sin is never the end of the story, not in our souls and not for our nation. The real story is always redemption. I am standing here because my mom has prayed me through some really tough times. I believe our nation has succeeded the same way because generations of Americans in their own ways have asked for grace and God has supplied it. So I will close with a word from a worship song that really helped me through this past year of COVID. The music is new, but the words draw from Scripture. May the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you. In your weeping and your rejoicing, he is for you. May his favor be upon our nation for 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children. Good night, and God bless the United States of America.
All right, you've been listening to Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. I was starting to ask, gentlemen, does his response serve as a reminder that Democrats cannot take for granted the support of African Americans, of Latinos, of Asians, and other groups? David.
I don't think Democrats can do that, and they have to think forward what that's going to look like for their base. Republicans have to do the same thing. Both parties face some pressures. We saw this from the census data earlier this week. But also, I think one thing to think about here is Senator Scott provided an opening for the White House to reach out, invite him to the White House to talk about the bill he introduced last year and to talk about how to move forward on criminal justice reform. That's the takeaway I would have from here. Set aside the economic arguments, set aside that Joe Biden inherited a recovery. So did Donald Trump. You can make that argument back and forth, but there was an opening here to at least reach out and do something about criminal justice reform to hit that 1 month mark that the president laid down as a marker in his speech as well.
Jonathan?
I mean, personally, as an African-American male and as a conservative, one thing in this speech stood out to me more than other things, and that's the fact that, one, the senator talked about his personal experience and his adversarial, encounters with police. But more than that, he actually expanded on something that had happened when he tried to champion police reform legislation, aimed to address that circumstance, aim to address circumstances that lead to people like George Floyd, dying as a result of police brutality. And I got to tell you, Catherine, it's a problem when the names on legislation are far more important than the people that the legislation is intended to address. It's a problem when the fact that you're a Republican means that Democrats or the party in power will not sponsor the legislation or work with you on it. This is a thorn in the side, I'd say. This is bad policy. This is bad not only for parties, it's bad for the American people. When it becomes more important who's right than what's right, we have a real problem to address.
Michael?
I think Senator Tim Scott had to walk a very tight line tonight. And I think it's unfortunate because he's someone who I think really could embody what I would hope to be a newer Republican Party, someone who understands the problems and the oppression of racism, someone who is working right now at the White House on overhauling police reform, and someone who I think has a lot of good instincts. But tonight he had to deliver on behalf of the Republicans. And to have to mention the former president's name in his speech, I think was something that he rather would not have done. I think that the fact that they're having to play total defense in these remarks about how the nation is going or where it could have been is emblematic of, I think, the difficulty that the Republicans do face. But I hope that individuals like Tim Scott, Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney, others will see that there is a different kind of Republican Party that can emerge from the ashes of January 6th. And this is something where, again, I think Joe Biden was putting that message out there, that bipartisan with a little b, that Americans of all political stripes can work together and come together on behalf of the values that have shaped and formed this nation. And I think this is something that I think, unfortunately, we didn't see that in Tim Scott's speech today on behalf of the Republican Party. But I think we'll see more of that in terms of Tim Scott's behavior and voting in the United States Senate.
We're kind of running out of time, but let me just get a real quick answer from each of you, like 30 seconds. President Biden is 78. He's always been an exuberant, if not always polished speaker. How did he seem to you tonight, David?
I thought he did very well. Most Americans have graded his administration as a C+. He did a pretty good speech for Joe Biden as well. Only a few minor gaffes wasn't bad. I'm surprised he didn't mention Mitch McConnell, but we never heard the words Mitch McConnell. So I think that was probably a home run for Democrats as well. For Republicans, for Donald Trump, what their way forward is, you did see cutouts to Kevin McCarthy. I think that is what's lingering in the background, the specter of 2022 midterms. That will be an important component, especially headed later this year, as all of these big things come up for a vote.
And Jonathan, what did you think?
Yeah, I didn't have any problems with his speech. I thought he did a fairly good job in communicating his message. I think the real problems are going to come down to policy, right? And what it really means to be bipartisan with a little b or a capital B, whatever you want to have, you know, whatever analogy he wants to use. What does the policy look like behind the speech and behind the rhetoric? I mean, he's president of the United States, and you know, we know that presidents generally have a good way of communicating a message. That's how they get elected. But we want to see what the results are and what the real meat and bones is, so to speak.
Michael?
I think it's great that we had a State of the Union where we are talking about policy differences and not about lies and attacks and misrepresentation and falsehoods and mischaracterizations. This is, I think, a home run in terms of that for the American people. And I think people have always underestimated Joe Biden. They underestimated him early on in the primaries, and I think they're going to underestimate him now. This is someone who is a liberal, is not afraid to be a liberal, but he's also not afraid to be a big president with a capital P. And I think this is something that the American people will see in the next few years.
All right, Michael Yockey, thank you very much. Thank you, Jonathan, David McEwen, and thank you for watching this special streaming edition of Inside California Politics. I'm Catherine Heenan. Have a good night.